Death Note is considered to be one of the greatest anime series of all time, but is it really? Let's find out. I always like to keep my reviews spoiler-free, but with Death Note, this just isn't possible, so if you're here to find out if Death Note is right for you, just go watch Death Note, because for me, it was something that I would consider to be life-changing, because before Death Note, I really only wanted to watch movies or a series of anything that had a lot of action, and Death Note, I thought it was going to be boring, because it's just people writing in a book, right? Sounds boring, but it's actually not. It's really intense, really exciting, even though it doesn't contain a lot of action, and Death Note really opened my eyes to many other movies, series, or other stories that were very story-driven and character-based. So be warned, there's going to be some spoilers. Death Note is a series which contains an alternate plane of existence where these creatures known as Shinigami, or death gods, would live. Now, it's really boring for them. They have no purpose of being there, actually, but each of them have in their possession a book called the Death Note. This book gives its owner the ability to kill anyone whose name is written on the page as long as he knows their face, followed by a comprehensive set of rules which govern the abilities of the Death Note. Just out of boredom, one of the Shinigami drops a Death Note down into Earth just to spice things up a bit, using this as an excuse to leave his realm and go down to Earth to find it. This book is found by Light Yagami, a college student with a very strong sense of justice that plans to use the book to eradicate all of the major criminals in the world and become a god. And a complete asshole. But Light isn't unopposed in his endeavors to purify this world and become a deity, because the world's most famous detective, L, is on the case. L is a very mysterious character. Not only is he the #1 detective in the world, but he's also #2 and #3 as well, under different aliases. Here he builds a small team from the Japanese police force, coincidentally containing Light's father. From here on, their great rivalry begins, as the near-omnipotent L hunts down clues to find and catch Light Yagami, or as he's better known by his pen name of Kira, which is the English word for killer. Kira's reign of terror has been very polarizing, because there are many people who fear him, but on the other hand, there are plenty of people that appreciate his work and see that he's actually lowering the crime rate around the world. But Light isn't alone in his efforts to conquer the world. He's also joined by his unrequited lover, aka overly obsessed girlfriend with the eyes of a death god who would just assume to kill any girl who looks at him, Misa. Misa is the most useless character in the series. In fact, she's probably one of the most useless characters in all of anime, and I know who Sakura is, so that's saying a lot. As far as I can tell, the only reason the character Misa even exists is at a poor attempt at fan service. She is this very cute character that's gothic, and also she wears a lot of these maid outfits, and that's definitely something that's going to turn a lot of people on. Plus, this was a manga that actually ran in Shonen Jump, and it didn't contain any fights or really any action like that, so it needed something to fit in with a lot of the other manga series that were running back at the time. I know Misa is actually pretty popular with a lot of people, and I probably made some people mad with doing that, but just think about it. Her only objective in the series is to die, and Light continuously tries to convince her to die in one way or another. She's always trading half of her life away for these eyes. The only times that she was ever useful was in one episode where her life was used as bait to get Rim to protect her and kill L in the process. And even with her Shinigami eyes, she traded away half of her life 2 times and was never useful. She never used her Shinigami eyes for anything else aside from that first initial time when she met Light Yagami, when she had to discover Kira's identity. If you were to think about what the story would be like if Misa never met Light Yagami, it wouldn't be as good as it would be if she never even existed in the story, but if they never met, she probably would have still continued with the killings and sending the tapes out and left evidence on the tape like she slipped up with in Death Note, and then L would have found that and they would have found her out, and then L would have had his own Death Note. That might have actually made the series just a little bit more enjoyable in that way, because then L, he would already know all of the stipulations and rules of a Death Note because he'd have one himself. Light Yagami would have one earlier, but then we wouldn't have this whole imprisonment scene, and then they wouldn't have to watch them for episodes at a time on this small TV. And that might actually have made things more interesting, but I think that they just had to add Misa just as a way to conform and add a little bit of fan service to be like some of the other series. That's all I can think, because she is completely useless. So like I said, Misa's only value was to be used as bait against Rim, so that Rim would kill L and save her life, basically, causing him to die in the process, making things a bit easier for Light Yagami, obviously. But from Light Yagami's perspective, this is something that is very normal for him. We see him using people a lot to achieve his goals, no matter what the cost, no matter what happens to the people around him, whether they're friends or his family, so he really doesn't care. But all in all, I really feel like the writer of the series painted himself into a corner by making the character of L so smart and such a strong obstacle. But aside from that, I always felt like the rivalry between these two was easily one of the most exciting and intense rivalries in pretty much all of anime, and there were a few times where I felt that L knew a few things that were just convenient that they wrote in for him, but they were just small, minor details that aren't even worth mentioning. L had been a very privileged child. Despite the fact that he grew up in an orphanage, he received training his entire life to be the best at what he does, and he has pockets deep enough to fund anything he wants to do. But in comparison to Light Yagami, who had an ordinary school life, who just excelled at everything he did, there was always that little bit of difference between the intelligence levels of Light and L, giving L that extra step forward, which really gave him the upper hand in many situations. But I felt that it was necessary that L had this extraordinary intelligence and a seemingly endless budget, because he's up against a foe who is almost as smart as he is, who has access to police records and also the killing power of a god. This rivalry was so intense, making everyday occurrences become thought-provoking, as suddenly something as simple as a tennis match will become a battle of minds. It's sad to say, but such an exciting rivalry has to come to an end, as all of Light's planning comes into fruition, as he's finally able to kill L and put an end to this conflict. After the death of L, Kira's reign supreme over the world, virtually ending all crime, and even causing world superpowers such as the United States to bend down to his will. But it wouldn't make for an interesting story if Kira was left unopposed. No, really. It wouldn't. So because of this, they created the characters of Nier and Mello and made them take the place of L. Both Nier and Mello were brought up in this same orphanage as L, so they're almost as smart as him, I'd say, but they don't really get along. So in the second half of the series, it's not just a one-on-one rivalry, it's more of a three-way battle. And unfortunately, that's when the show takes a bit of a decline here, because neither of these characters are as enjoyable as L, and furthermore, I don't think that they're worthy of taking his legacy or solving the case that he wasn't able to complete, which was proving that Kira is actually Light Yagami. And I'm not saying that the show goes downhill from here because I don't like these characters. If they were written well, then I could get over it. It wouldn't be a big deal. But there are times from here on in the second half where the writing does get a bit shoddy. Now let's talk about some plot holes. Nier and Mello really have no way of knowing about the existence of the Death Note, and if you think about that, then that pretty much negates nearly everything in the second half of the series. Alright, I'll give it to Nier, because there was a little bit of an explanation for him. I don't buy it at all, but Nier had followed this rumor that a police officer had heard about this notebook that was magical and could kill people if you wrote their names down in it, and he went on that lead and then found a bunch of other evidence and worked for 3 years trying to find their actual reasonable evidence that there was an existence of a Death Note, and that's why he believes there's one. I think that's very convenient, and that's as good as it gets with that. We have Mello, on the other hand, which knows about the Death Note for absolutely no reason. They explain later on when Mello breaks into Nier's base at gunpoint holding this hostage that they had never spoken since they left the orphanage, and that knowledge of the Death Note wasn't available to them then. So Mello shouldn't have known about the Death Note, and if it wasn't for Mello knowing about the Death Note, he wouldn't have captured Light's sister and held her for ransom in exchange for the Death Note, and that event in itself is what led Nier and his people to believe that somebody on the new L team actually had the Death Note and could possibly be Kira. So yes, I do dislike those two characters, but it wouldn't have been a big issue for me if they had covered up these plot holes and also just explained things in a way that would remotely sound believable. Moving on from this, the rivalry between Light and Nier was actually pretty entertaining. However, I always felt that some of Nier's educated guesses fell too close to the work that L had made in discovering some of the breakthroughs that he had made, and it was just a guess for Nier. I felt that it didn't take him long at all to pretty much get on the same page as L. And I know that they're trained to think alike, but it really felt like there were times when Nier was just pulling information out of a magic hat. In the second half of the story, we witness Light's character development as he degrades to a self-righteous asshole who is willing to use everyone around him to his advantage. To Light, there's no bridge that's too good to burn. He almost killed his sister at one point by writing her name in the Death Note, which I felt was a big turning point for him because that's when we see a lot of changes in his character. We also see that he convinces his dad to trade half of his life to get the Shinigami eyes and begin using the Death Note, and then after there was this scene where his father had gotten shot, he was in the hospital and Light was over his bed where he was just yelling at him saying that he shouldn't die in vain, and those were actually his last words to his father as he was trying to convince him to kill somebody by writing their name in his Death Note. He really has no shame in the second half. And I think that's disgusting because while Light is convincing everybody else to do all of these killings in his name, he wasn't actually doing any of the killings in the second half. He was manipulating other people into doing it themselves. And then the parts where he drove his dad to death, I found that to be inexcusable because Light's father was actually my favorite character of the series. He was a really good guy. He was a very law-abiding citizen that would uphold the law even if it meant his life, but he would also know where to draw the line and step in and do what it takes to save his family. He went through hell because of Light. He was locked up, his daughter was kidnapped, and then he had to save her. After that, she was mentally unstable, and then he witnessed his wife become really depressed because of everything that's happening. So everything around him fell apart as Light benefited from it, and then he's going to sit there while his father's on his deathbed and say that he died in vain. It is disgusting. So in the second half of the series, I quickly became disgusted with Light Yagami, but then again, at the same time, this development was very well written because it's everything that you would expect out of a person who's in that position doing those things. So while I am disgusted with him, I can appreciate the writing that they put into it. And of course, we all know how this ends when Nier confronts Light about being Kira and his pride is stripped away as we see exactly how pathetic he actually was as he's begging for his life. I felt that this ending was justified because Light had become such an evil person, and don't get me wrong, in the beginning of the story I was rooting for him. I was on his side. I thought he was doing the right thing by cleaning up the world and making it a better place, but then in the second half he was resulting to using everyone around him and getting them to kill people that were just doing things on the level of being simple bullies simply to keep up with appearances just because there were no other criminals that he could kill. Overall, I feel that the story of Death Note was enjoyable despite some of its shortcomings, and if it sounds like I'm being really harsh on the series, it's only because I feel that Death Note really needs a critical review. There's so much positive about it that I feel that there really aren't enough people taking a look at some of the flaws of the series. Don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite anime out there. This was like my 6th time watching it, and I could still rewatch it again. I really like the show, but I think that it needs to have a critical review. Death Note was animated well, but I really think that this would be something that would benefit from having a Blu Ray remaster. Somebody really needs to get on that, but for 2006, I felt that Madhouse did a great job. They did an amazing job of animating the proper expressions, or lack thereof, on characters' faces, and you could really tell when the characters are sad angry or surprised. You could tell all of their emotions, and it was also very important that they kept this liar's face at times, because when you heard some of their thoughts, you had to be able to tell if they were lying or not. You could tell on their faces as if they were trying to keep their composure in a situation where their thoughts differed from the way that they were acting, and I really enjoyed the fact that they did so well on these emotions. The only strange thing I spotted with the animation was how all of, or most of the vehicles at least, were animated with CG. They really stood out, and it didn't really make sense why they were there like that, but that is a practice that I see in a lot of times with anime, where they will animate the vehicles with CG. Not sure why they do that. Now, as far as the audio goes, I thought the soundtrack matched the darker tone of the series, and I enjoyed all of the openings and the closings, but my favorite song out of all of them was the song from the closing, Zetsubo Billy by Maximum the Hormone. Now, as far as the voice acting goes, every time I watched Death Note, I always watched it with the subtitles, but this time around, I watched it for my first time with the English dub. People were telling me that I had to watch it with the dub, and I actually liked it. They did a good job on the dub. I expected much worse out of this, hence why I watched it so many other times with subtitles alone, but they did a good job. A good job. But personally, I prefer the Japanese audio. However, I could see myself rewatching this with dub in the future. Either way is fine. They both are pretty good. So for my overall score of Death Note, I give it an 8.5 out of 10. And what's bringing it down here is simply some of the things that happened in the second half, a few of those plot holes that I spotted. Personally, if I was rating just the first half of the series, the conflict between Light and L, I probably would have given that a 9 or maybe a 9.5, because I really enjoyed that, and I thought that was very well written. But despite its flaws, Death Note is a show that everyone out there needs to see if they're an anime fan. You could show it to your friends, whether or not they like anime or not, and this is definitely a show that you could show to anyone and get them interested in anime as far as I see. So if you've seen Death Note, then let me know your thoughts about it in the comments section below. Don't forget to check out some of my other videos just in case you missed them, such as my top 10 anime movies, and also my anime review playlist just in case you missed a few. Thanks for all your support with your likes and comments. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.